Good day. We are delighted to have with us Khoon Yeow, who is our Ethics Standards Board member and also the project leader for the localization of the International Ethics Code into the MIA bylaws. Khoon Yeow, welcome to our studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for taking your time to be with us this morning. What are the key changes that are incorporated into the restructured code?
Well, first thing is that you will notice that there's a much clearer language being used in the revised or restructured code. This structure has been changed in such a way that you have got a differentiation between something called application paragraphs versus requirement paragraphs. So that differentiation makes it very clear for users of the restructured code or even the bylaws that this is something that you need to comply with, and that is something that helps you along in complying with that fundamental principle. Now, over and above that, there's an enhanced conceptual framework whereby there are actually extensive revisions already being made to the code that ensures that we are able to identify and assess threats in a very much more structured manner. There is this revised concept of independence. There are additional guidance being inserted in the restructured code that talks about how we actually apply independence in practice. There are new provisions added in relation to the PAIBS, the Professional Accountants in Business. Amongst those additions to the restructured code in relation to the PAIB provisions are in relation to something called the threats, the identifying threats of independence in arriving at financial information. And over and above that, there's a new section in relation to inducement or pressure to breach the fundamental principles. There is some material application or guidance in relation to the need to understand facts and circumstances when we apply professional judgment. There's also some new materials in relation to how we comply with the fundamental principles of exercising something called professional skepticism. That's the very big word, I believe, in the entire profession. Now, you will also then have some other minor changes made a little bit here and there in relation to inducements, in relation to what we define as assistance, or even bribery, stuff like that, which actually becomes very commonplace now when we actually look into how do we play a role as professional accountants in this business line or in this particular profession and in relation to that particular topic area.
Thanks. That's a great overview, and I believe as we progress in our interview, we'll probably touch on some of the key areas changes. One of the fundamental concepts that we have throughout the entire code is that it starts with a conceptual framework. So perhaps maybe you would like to share from any refinements or changes in the conceptual framework.
Thank you, Simon. Well, there are actually clearly application materials in relation to professional skepticism and professional judgment. The framework now has got a three-step approach in relation to identifying ethics and independence issues. So in the very first step itself, it says that we need to identify, obviously, the threats of compliance to the fundamental code itself. And in the second step, then we need to evaluate whether this threat is actually at an acceptable level or not. Now, obviously, if this leads to a new concept that has been introduced into the code itself, talking about something called reasonable and informed third party. So we have got this reasonable and informed third party test, which has its own definition, in fact, in the restructured code, which then guides us along in this second step. Now, assuming that we get through the second step, we then have a third step.
Yeah.
And the third step is one whereby it says that we need to actually decide if the threat is not actually at an acceptable level. We're going to take some action in relation to it. The action could involve, obviously, the easiest one, elimination. But other than elimination, we also have got certain safeguards in reducing these threats to an acceptable level. Yeah. Now, also touching into the conceptual framework changes itself, we have got a new definition of safeguards. So that's a much more robust definition of safeguards. We also have a new provision in relation to requiring professional accountants to have this test called the stand back test. So for the first time, we require people to stand back and basically ask ourselves, have we reached the right conclusion? The overall conclusion basically is are the actions taken appropriate in order to address that particular threat to independence?
You mentioned about independence, and early on, one of the key changes was relating to partner rotation. And you're a partner yourself, as a practitioner.
Indeed, I am.
What are the key changes affecting partner rotation? Perhaps you can share in a nutshell. But before that, under the MIA bylaws, we already have that effective for December. Has there been any significant changes since then for this code? And what are the key overall changes in terms of partner rotation?
Well, the first thing we need to understand is even though we do have a restructured code up and coming, the requirements in relation to long association remains applicable. It's still the same. And for everybody out there who's looking at this, just to let you know that there is an FAQ, or frequently asked questions, issued by the MIA, which you could readily download it from the website itself. Now, touching then back to the matter about partner rotation. So as a very quick overview, you should be aware that there are actually changes that were made previously, which we still reiterate in the current restructured code, in relation to something called key audit partners. So key audit partners now is like an umbrella definition. It covers not just engagement partner and engagement quality control reviewer. It also covers something called other key audit partners. In the older code, we used to have this requirement called 5+2. So we used to say that yes, if you're an engagement partner or engagement quality control reviewer or even a key audit partner, you could stay on for a job or an engagement for 5 years, and then you have to cool off after 2 years. So it was felt back then that perhaps the cooling off period was just not enough.
Sure. Okay.
Right? And so we then said, okay, moving forward after 2023, we would actually like to have engagement partners, first of all, serving a cumulative period of 7 years, and then they have to step down or they have to take a cooling off period for a period of 5 years. As for engagement quality control reviewers, after 2023, they are supposed to actually apply 7 years with a 3 years cooling off period. And in relation to the key audit partners, they have got a 7 years time on rule and 2 years time off rule. Now we realized that sometime from last year until 2023, the IESBA gave us an option of having a transitional provision, so to speak. So I believe
did that help?
I believe we did.
We did.
It actually did, yes. So we actually thought that, it would be great if we could actually use the transitional provisions to ease practitioners into the newer rules. So in the revised rules, you would then notice that engagement partners, they will still have a time-on period of 7 years, but they would then have a time-off period of 3 years. With the idea that if you actually coincide the 3 years, it will calculate up to 2023, and then thereafter you will go on straight into the new code of having 7 years plus 5 years time off. Well, in relation to then the key audit partners, you will have 7 years time off during this transition period, followed then by a 2 years of cooling off period. And then you will go in straight into the new 7-year time frame. So I believe that these particular requirements are very clearly demonstrated in the table and also available in the frequently asked questions.
Earlier on, you mentioned about one of the key features of the restructured code is concerning the matter of NOCLAR. So NOCLAR is a matter that non-compliance with laws and regulations, as I understand, and also this has already been there in the MI bylaws. So how has perhaps maybe to recap for our viewers, what are the key principles of NOCLAR?
Okay, so first thing first, of course, NOCLAR is a mnemonic, right? And as you rightly pointed out, it's a very big mouthful, non-compliance with laws and regulations. Yes. So hence for everybody out there, just to let you know, that's a mnemonic and that's the full form of what NOCLAR actually represents. Now for those of us who are then more curious, what really does NOCLAR mean? So NOCLAR refers to any acts of omission or any acts of commission. Now it could be intentional, it could be unintentional, it could actually be committed by a client, it could be committed by an employee, and it's actually in relation to whether are we in breach of any prevailing laws and regulations.
In terms of the scope, so does it, does everything, of the law under the sun is being affected? For example, like traffic offences and all that. I can't believe you haven't tracked everything, right?
Good question, Simon. Actually, let's examine very carefully the scoping of NOCLAR.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we look at NOCLAR, we are primarily looking at laws and regulations that have a direct effect on the PA, on the professional accountants in practice, and it is usually in the context of whether does it have an effect on the amounts or the disclosures in the financial statements.
Right.
So that's the first aspect.
Putting that into context. Yes.
Now the second aspect then is in relation to whether those laws and regulations, would it actually have a certain fundamental effect on the company or entity's business and operations, and whether is that necessary, the compliance with laws is necessary for the purpose of avoiding any material penalties. Yeah. So clearly when we talk about the scoping of NOCLAR, we have these two primary scopes. What we do know very clearly that's not within scope, for example, is things which are clearly inconsequential.
Right.
So if you take, for example, your traffic offense just now, so if that is a one-off offense and it's not a very big thing, it's just a minor scratch to the car, for example, then one could deem that to be clearly inconsequential. Right? Now, other than that, there's also something called personal misconduct. So if you look at personal misconduct that has absolutely nothing to do with your job, absolutely nothing to do with the employer, nothing to do with the client, then that would also not fall within the scope of NOCLAR. Now lastly, of course, any form of non-compliance other than by the client or other than by the employee or employer would not actually fall within the scope of NOCLAR as well. So in a way, it's actually very directly attributable to our day-to-day jobs, right? And just to recap, it has to be something consequential. It has got a material effect to what they're doing.
So all the principles are actually in that code. So I would exhort, our viewers to actually please have a look at all these provisions relating to the non-compliance with laws and regulations. So, and that affects both the professional accountants in business and the practitioners.
That is correct.
Yeah. So the scope is very wide. The other matter that is of interest is actually the key provisions of inducements, because it's something that even while we were dialoguing with people, not many are aware of this new provision.
Yeah, that's true, Simon. So let's just be very clear as well about one thing. We used to have some inducement form of paragraphs in the old bylaws as well. Yeah? So it's not an
so
entirely new concept. What we have just done in the restructured code is to expand it, to make it far more robust in its application to us. So the first thing that we need to understand is that they have now expanded the scope. So it's not just looking at the professional accountants in public practice. It also covers those who are in business. So first thing we need to understand, it guides into what is considered acceptable or unacceptable behavior. There's specific application guidances, and it covers both PAIBs and those in public practice. So that's the first thing. Second thing, then there is now a much clearer definition of what is an inducement. So interestingly, they give a very nice definition to say that inducement is actually an object, a situation, whereby, or an action whereby you use as a means to influence another person's behavior or to influence another person's action. But what is very interesting here is that it says it's not necessarily due to the intention to improperly influence the individual's behavior. Right? So it's a very interesting addition into the bylaws definition itself. Now the bylaw also provides us now with a lot more examples of what are inducement, and I would then encourage everybody out there to take a look at these enhanced examples, because even preferential treatment, gifts and hospitality, for instance, can be considered a form of inducement under the restructured code. Now, we know very well, therefore, under the restructured code, the professional accountants are clearly prohibited from offering and as well as accepting inducements as stated in the bylaws itself. Now, we also know that professional accountants are not supposed to accept or even encourage other people to accept or to even offer inducements with this intention of improperly affecting people's behavior. So these provisions, interestingly, doesn't just apply to us. It also now has been extended to include immediate family members.
Okay.
as well as close family members. So this is something like a game changer, yeah, in terms of the scope
Yes,
of
it's
how
very wide.
inducement affects us in the profession.
Okay. We know that the bylaws is encompassing, for all practitioners and also the professional accountants in business. And oftentimes we consider that for practitioners it goes without saying that they need to comply with independence, they need to exercise professional skepticism, and but for PAIBs, what is there in the code that has been enhanced or perhaps emphasized more so that PAIBs are also up to speed with the compliance with ethics?
Well, Simon, I like this concept of professional skepticism because as a practitioner, auditor, we have always been brought up in this environment, whereby we have to exercise professional skepticism. So interestingly, now we are seeing a creep of this professional skepticism into even PAIBs. So moving forward with this restructured code, for example, we have a very specific section. So section 220 in this case, it actually deals with PAIBs in relation to their fundamental compliance with the principles and application of the conceptual framework in order to identify, evaluate, and to address threats when it comes to the preparation of financial information. So say for example here, you have got a new provision that says, in the event that you are preparing the financial information and it comes to your awareness that there's something wrong in the financial information. Okay. So the new code now tells us that we should actually immediately try to dissociate ourselves from this particular financially misleading financial information, And you will then notice that there's a new provision that as well that says that in the event you think that dissociating yourself is just not enough and you've done your job to highlight it, nothing's been done about it, you may even have to end up resigning from your employing organization. So there's a paradigm shift conceptually to a lot of professional accountants in business, because gone were the days whereby we could just say that I've done my job, I've whistleblown, so to speak, and that's it. I don't have to do further things about it. There is also, moving on to another angle in relation to the PAIBs, there is this pressure to breach the fundamental principle rule. So in this particular new requirement, it tells us that those professional accountants will not supposed to actually allow pressure from other people that could result in us having a breach of the fundamental principles. Now, it also says that we cannot then also place pressure on other people. So that means we cannot place pressure on other people that will actually make them breach the fundamental principle. So it's a very holistic point of view of how this particular requirement applies to professional accountants.
It's a very broad application.
Oh yes, I mean it is.
To come to the near end of our interview, I think we still have one point which is at the back of everyone's mind, is that the code seems to say that there is enhanced provisions in terms of professional skepticism, as you alluded to just now, and also in terms of the exercise of professional judgment. What is your take on this?
Well, when it comes to the professional skepticism, the bylaw introduces a lot of explanatory paragraphs and guidances. So the intention is now to explain, especially for us auditors, how does compliance with the fundamental part of the bylaw or principle of the bylaw helps to facilitate professional skepticism. This is now prominently in a particular section, section 120 of the restructured code, for which then you will notice that it is something that's codifying what we have been applying in practice. But it's just that now, because it's clearly stated and it's clearly described, it enables not just the auditors, but it probably enables everybody in the entire ecosystem to see how this particular compliance actually enhances professional skepticism. Now, speaking of skepticism, I believe, Simon, you probably will know as well that this is going to keep having a scope creep even to the PAIBs.
Yes.
Right? And that probably means that there is some guidance now available even for the PAIBs moving forward in the near future in relation to how they could exercise skepticism in accordance with the code.
In terms of professional judgment, is there any other
So when it comes to professional judgment, so we have these new provisions as well being inserted into the restructured code, whereby it helps accountants, professional accountants, understand what exactly we need to consider in relation to our exercising of professional judgment.
Okay.
So let me give you just a very simple example. Yeah. So in the new code, it basically tells us that a professional accountant needs to consider whether is there any inconsistency between what I expect as a professional accountant versus the facts and the information that I've already obtained in the course of my work. So that particular clear requirement now becomes an addition that makes it more important for us to actually take that one step back all the time to ask ourselves, are we exercising the right level of professional judgment? And that in a way correlates nicely to the earlier point on skepticism.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts on all the salient features from the restructured code. Just to remind our viewers that this code is going to be in our MIA bylaws and effective by June 2019. And there are some localization that we actually, matters that was beyond the IESBA code that we incorporated, still remain to be incorporated into the MIA bylaws.
That's correct.
Would you like to comment on any particular code?
Well, I think to be clear to everybody out there as well, So during the journey of transferring from the older bylaws to what I call now the newer bylaws, by incorporating the restructured code, we realized that we had certain very good provisions in the older code. So say for example, a very easy one when it comes to professional clearance letters.
Okay.
So professional clearance letters is something that's encouraged in the international code, but we in Malaysia have always been making it mandatory. So we thought that that's a very good requirement because it actually reinforces a high level of ethical belief in the Malaysian profession. So we decided, I believe in the board, to continue to carry forward that requirement, but we now also clearly denote such similar paragraphs using the MY, the prefix of MY, to illustrate the fact it's a Malaysian addition or insertion, but it does not fundamentally mean that we changed the code. We didn't. It's still the same thing. It's actually totally in compliance with the international code.
In other words, we can still assert dual compliance.
That's correct, Simon.
Last but not least, on behalf of the Ethics Standards Board, what is your word or final word for MIA members?
Well, to all the members out there, I would strongly encourage that you take as much time as you can to quickly delve into the details of the restructured code, because this is a code that's coming live in June 2019. You will probably need that time to actually study the changes that you need to make to your own internal systems in order to make sure that you're able to comply with the restructured code on a timely basis.
With that, thank you so much, Khoon Yeow,
Thank you, Simon.
for sharing it.